The diner was small, warm, and familiar, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. An elderly widow sat alone in a corner booth, her hands gently wrapped around a cup of tea that had already gone cold. Her clothes were simple, clean, but worn with age. The kind of woman you could tell had lived a long life of giving more than she ever asked for. She wasn't rushing anyone. She wasn't bothering anyone. She was just waiting. Across the diner, a loud, impatient man argued with a waitress about his order. His voice carried over every table. Laughter followed, not friendly laughter, but mocking, entitled noise. He slammed his hand on the counter, demanding faster service. When the waitress finally walked away, his eyes landed on the widow. "Hey," he snapped. "You done yet, Grandma? Some of us don't have all day." The widow looked up, startled. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'm waiting for my son." The man rolled his eyes. "Figures." The diner grew quiet. Forks paused mid-air. No one laughed now. The widow tried to shift her plate closer, her hands trembling slightly. As she stood to move, she accidentally brushed the edge of the man's table. That was all it took. "Watch it," he shouted, standing up abruptly. Before anyone could react, his hand came down hard across her face. The sound echoed through the diner. The widow froze. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, stunned, one hand slowly rising to her cheek. And no one moved. This is how moments like these happen, not because one person is cruel, but because everyone else becomes silent. For many elderly people, the greatest fear isn't hunger or loneliness. It's public humiliation. Quick question before we continue. Where are you watching this from right now? Comment your country and city below, because disrespect like this happens everywhere. The man smirked, proud of himself. "Learn some manners," he muttered. The widow whispered, barely audible, "Please. I didn't mean to." Her hands shook as she reached into her purse. Not to defend herself, but to grab her phone. And as she looked down at the screen, she whispered words that would soon change everything. "My son is on his way." What no one in that diner realized was who that son really was. The diner stayed frozen in time. No one spoke. No one moved. The elderly widow stood there, her cheeks slowly turning red, her eyes wide with shock. The man who had slapped her didn't step back. He stood taller, chest out, feeding on the silence around him. "What?" he snapped, looking around. "She bumped into me." The waitress covered her mouth. A young couple at the counter looked down at their plates. Someone near the window started recording, their hands shaking. The widow finally lowered herself back into the booth. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a napkin, gently pressing it against her cheek. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She apologized. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." That apology hit harder than the slap. Many elderly people were raised to believe silence equals dignity. They apologize, not because they're wrong, but because they've learned that peace often costs pride. The bully laughed. "Unbelievable," he said loudly. "Old people shouldn't be out alone if they can't function." That's when the widow pulled out her phone. Her hands were slow, stiff with age, and the bully noticed. "Oh, come on," he mocked. "You calling for backup now?" She shook her head gently. "No. I'm just letting my son know where I am." The word son seemed to amuse him. "Your son," he scoffed. "What's he gonna do? Bring you a helmet?" A few people shifted uncomfortably. Be honest for a moment. If you were sitting in that diner and saw this happening, would you step in, or would fear keep you quiet? Comment step in or stay quiet below. The widow typed slowly, carefully. "I'm at the diner. Please come when you can." She placed the phone face down on the table, as if embarrassed for even sending the message. The bully leaned closer now, lowering his voice but making sure she could hear every word. "You should be grateful I didn't hit you harder," he said. "People like you always think the world owes them something." The widow looked up at him, not with anger, but sadness. "I don't want anything," she said softly. "I just want to eat in peace." For a brief moment, Something flickered across the man's face. Then it vanished. He slapped the table instead. "Don't talk back to me." The manager finally stepped out from behind the counter. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to." The bully turned on him instantly. "Stay out of it. This doesn't concern you." The manager hesitated and stepped back. This is how bullies gain power. Not through strength, but through hesitation from people who could stop them. The widow closed her eyes. She took a slow breath, the kind only someone who's endured a lifetime of hardship can manage. Then she said something that surprised everyone. "My husband used to protect me," she said quietly. "He's gone now. So I learned to be strong without noise." The diner went silent again, but this time it felt different. The bully sneered. "Touching story." He grabbed his jacket, clearly thinking the moment was over. "Next time, watch where you're going." As he turned away, the bell above the diner door rang. Everyone looked up. The widow looked up too. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but relief. Sometimes help doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks in quietly, right when you need it most. Do you believe patience is a form of strength? Or does silence only invite more abuse? Share your opinion in the comments. The door closed behind the newcomer. And for the first time since the slap, the bully felt something he hadn't expected at all. Someone was watching him. The man who walked into the diner didn't make a scene. No loud footsteps. No aggressive posture. He simply paused near the entrance, letting the door close behind him as his eyes adjusted to the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, calm. The kind of presence that didn't demand attention, yet somehow pulled it in. The widow saw him instantly. Her shoulders dropped just a little. Not because the danger was gone, but because she wasn't alone anymore. He scanned the diner slowly. The tense faces. The silence that felt heavier than noise. Then his eyes found her. Her cheek was red. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were glossy, but proud. He walked toward her booth and sat down across from her without a word. "Mom," he said gently. She tried to smile. "You didn't have to rush." "I wanted to," he replied. For a moment, they just sat there. A mother and her son. No drama. No confrontation. But the room hadn't forgotten what had happened. The bully stood near the counter, pretending to scroll through his phone, though his eyes kept flicking toward the booth. He sized the man up quickly, dismissively. "Everything okay here?" the son asked softly. The widow hesitated. Then she nodded. "It's fine. I'm fine." Parents often protect their children, even when they're the ones hurting. They minimize pain so their children don't carry the weight of it. The son noticed the napkin still pressed lightly against her cheek. He reached out, carefully lowering her hand. His jaw tightened, just a fraction. "Who did this?" he asked quietly. She followed his gaze toward the man at the counter. "Please," she whispered. "Don't make trouble. I just want to go home." He nodded slowly. "Okay." But he didn't look away. "Let me ask you something. If someone hurt your parent, would you stay calm, or would you confront them immediately? Comment calm or confront below." The bully noticed the attention now. He smirked and turned fully toward the booth. "What's the problem?" he called out. "Family reunion." The son stood up. Not fast. Not aggressively. Just enough for the room to feel the shift. "I believe you put your hands on my mother," he said evenly. The bully laughed. "Your mother? She bumped into me." The son nodded once. "And you slapped her." "So what?" the bully snapped. "She's fine." The widow reached for her son's sleeve. "Please." He placed his hand gently over hers. "I hear you." Then he looked back at the man. "You don't hit someone because you're impatient," he said. "You don't humiliate someone because they're older. And you don't walk away pretending it didn't happen." The bully stepped closer, puffing out his chest. "You threatening me?" The son's voice never rose. "No." That calm unsettled him more than anger ever could. "I'm explaining something," the son continued. Respect doesn't disappear with age. And strength isn't proven by who you can intimidate. The bully scoffed. You some kind of preacher now? The son held his gaze. No. I'm a son. The diner was silent again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was attention. True authority doesn't shout. It doesn't need permission. It simply stands firm and waits. The bully glanced around, suddenly aware of how many eyes were on him. How many phones were still recording. You think these people scare me, he said loudly. The son tilted his head slightly. I think you're already scared. That landed. The bully's face flushed. Sit down before you get hurt. The son didn't move. Instead, he said something unexpected. You should apologize. A murmur rippled through the diner. To her, the son added, gesturing toward his mother. Not to me. The bully stared at him, stunned. Then he laughed, too loud, too forced. You're crazy. The widow pulled at her son's sleeve again. Please, let's go. He turned to her, his voice softening instantly. In a moment. He looked back at the bully. This is your moment. The bully clenched his fists. The room held its breath. Every bully eventually faces a choice. Double down, or back down. The bully opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a voice came from behind. Sir, someone said quietly, you might want to calm down. The bully turned. A customer near the window lowered his phone and stared at the son with wide eyes. That's Steven Seagal, he whispered. The martial arts legend. The whisper spread. Table to table. Phone to phone. Steven closed his eyes briefly. Not in pride. Not in relief. But in disappointment. The bully's smirk vanished. What? He muttered. Steven opened his eyes and met his stare. I didn't want this to be about who I am, he said calmly. I wanted it to be about who you chose to be. The diner went dead silent. And in that silence, the bully finally understood something terrifying. He hadn't just slapped an elderly widow. He had crossed the wrong line, with the wrong family, in front of the wrong witnesses. And this story was far from over. The name didn't explode through the diner. It traveled. Slowly. Quietly. Like a ripple moving across still water. That's Steven Seagal. The actor. No, the martial artist. I think that's really him. Phones lifted higher. Whispers layered over one another. What had been a moment of private cruelty was now becoming something public, something undeniable. Steven stood there, calm as ever, his body relaxed, his hands open at his sides. He looked nothing like the larger-than-life figure people imagined from movies or headlines. He looked like a son standing up for his mother. The bully felt it instantly. The shift. The power he'd been feeding on, fear, silence, hesitation, evaporated. His eyes darted around the room, trying to reclaim control. This is ridiculous, he scoffed. I don't care who you are. Steven nodded slightly. You shouldn't. That response confused him. I don't want special treatment, Steven continued. I want equal treatment. The widow stood slowly, still holding the edge of the booth for balance. Steven, please, she said. Let's go home. Steven turned to her. His voice softened. We will. Then he faced the bully again. But not like this. When someone finally speaks against injustice, it isn't about revenge. It's about restoring balance. The bully tried to laugh it off. So what? Everyone's against me now. No one answered. That silence, unified, watchful, was louder than shouting. Quick question for you watching. Do you believe public accountability actually changes behavior? Or does it only embarrass people? Share your opinion in the comments. The diner manager stepped forward again, emboldened now. Sir, I'm asking you to leave. The bully rounded on him. Or what? Or we call the police, the manager said, his voice steadier than before. Steven raised a hand slightly. There's no need to escalate. The bully snapped his head back toward him. You think you're in charge here? Steven met his gaze. No. I think you had a chance to make this right, and you still do. The bully's jaw tightened. Apologize, Steven said again. Clear. Final. The widow looked up at the man who had hurt her. Her eyes weren't angry. They were tired. The bully swallowed. For the first time since he'd walked into the diner, he felt small. But instead of choosing humility, he chose pride. I'm not apologizing to anyone, he said loudly. Especially not some old. He stopped himself mid-sentence. Because Steven had stepped closer. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just close enough to be undeniable. You don't finish that sentence, Steven said quietly. The bully felt it, not fear of violence, but fear of exposure. Every phone pointed at him. Every eye watching. Bullies thrive in shadows. When light appears, they either change or crumble. The bully looked around wildly. You think you're better than me? Steven shook his head. No. I think you're capable of better. That landed harder than any insult. The bully scoffed weakly. You don't know me. Steven nodded. That's true. But I know what you did. A woman near the counter spoke up, her voice trembling but firm. You should apologize. Another voice joined. She didn't deserve that. Then another. And another. The widow's eyes filled with tears, not of pain, but of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Support. Let me ask you, have you ever stayed silent when you knew something was wrong, and wished later you had spoken up? You're not alone. Share your thoughts below. The bully raised his hand slightly, overwhelmed. Everyone just needs to calm down. Steven took a step back, giving him space. This ends when you take responsibility. The bully looked at the widow again. Really looked. At her shaking hands. At her bruised cheek. At the dignity she still carried despite everything. For a moment, a real moment, it seemed like he might say it. The bell above the diner door rang again. A police officer stepped inside. The room stiffened. The bully's shoulders straightened instantly, relief flashing across his face. Officer, he called out. Thank God you're here. Steven didn't move. The widow instinctively reached for her son's arm. The officer surveyed the room, the phones, the tension, the faces, and frowned. What's going on? He asked. The bully spoke quickly. These people are harassing me. This guy's threatening me. Steven spoke next, not louder, not faster. My mother was assaulted, he said. We're asking for accountability. The officer looked at the widow's cheek. Then at the phones. Then at the bully. Truth doesn't need volume. It only needs consistency. The officer exhaled slowly. Sir, he said to the bully, did you strike this woman? The bully hesitated. That hesitation said everything. The officer nodded once. I'm going to need you to step outside. The bully's face drained of color. This is insane. Steven turned to his mother. Are you okay? She nodded, tears slipping free now. I am. Because you came. Steven held her hand. The officer guided the bully toward the door as murmurs filled the diner. Not cheers, not insults, but relief. As the door closed behind them, the diner released a collective breath. Steven looked around once more. This wasn't about me, he said quietly. It was about her. The widow squeezed his hand. And in that moment, something shifted, not just in the diner, but in everyone watching. Because they had seen what courage looked like. And they would never forget it. The diner manager stepped forward again, emboldened now. Sir, I'm asking you to leave. The bully rounded on him. Or what? Or we call the police, the manager said, his voice steadier than before. Steven raised a hand slightly. There's no need to escalate. The bully snapped his head back toward him. You think you're in charge here? Steven met his gaze. No. I think you had a chance to make this right, and you still do. The bully's jaw tightened. Apologize, Steven said again. Clear. Final. The widow looked up at the man who had hurt her. Her eyes weren't angry. They were tired. The bully swallowed. For the first time since he'd walked into the diner, he felt small. But instead of choosing humility, he chose pride. "I'm not apologizing to anyone," he said loudly. "Especially not some old." He stopped himself mid-sentence. Because Steven had stepped closer. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just close enough to be undeniable. "You don't finish that sentence," Steven said quietly. The bully felt it, not fear of violence, but fear of exposure. Every phone pointed at him. Every eye watching. Bullies thrive in shadows. When light appears, they either change or crumble. The bully looked around wildly. "You think you're better than me?" Steven shook his head. "No. I think you're capable of better." That landed harder than any insult. The bully scoffed weakly. "You don't know me." Steven nodded. "That's true. But I know what you did." A woman near the counter spoke up, her voice trembling but firm. "You should apologize." Another voice joined. "She didn't deserve that." Then another. And another. The widow's eyes filled with tears, not of pain, but of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Support. "Let me ask you, have you ever stayed silent when you knew something was wrong, and wished later you had spoken up? You're not alone. Share your thoughts below." The bully raised his hand slightly, overwhelmed. "Everyone just needs to calm down." Steven took a step back, giving him space. "This ends when you take responsibility." The bully looked at the widow again. Really looked. At her shaking hands. At her bruised cheek. At the dignity she still carried despite everything. For a moment, a real moment, it seemed like he might say it. "I'm..." The bell above the diner door rang again. A police officer stepped inside. The room stiffened. The bully's shoulders straightened instantly, relief flashing across his face. "Officer," he called out. "Thank God you're here." Steven didn't move. The widow instinctively reached for her son's arm. The officer surveyed the room, the phones, the tension, the faces, and frowned. "What's going on?" he asked. The bully spoke quickly. "These people are harassing me. This guy's threatening me." Steven spoke next, not louder, not faster. "My mother was assaulted," he said. "We're asking for accountability." The officer looked at the widow's cheek. Then at the phones. Then at the bully. Truth doesn't need volume. It only needs consistency. The officer exhaled slowly. "Sir," he said to the bully, "did you strike this woman?" The bully hesitated. That hesitation said everything. The officer nodded once. "I'm going to need you to step outside." The bully's face drained of color. "This is insane." Steven turned to his mother. "Are you okay?" She nodded, tears slipping free now. "I am. Because you came." Steven held her hand. The officer guided the bully toward the door as murmurs filled the diner, not cheers, not insults, but relief. As the door closed behind them, the diner released a collective breath. Steven looked around once more. "This wasn't about me," he said quietly. "It was about her." The widow squeezed his hand. And in that moment, something shifted, not just in the diner, but in everyone watching. Because they had seen what courage looked like. And they would never forget it. The diner slowly returned to motion. Forks clinked again. Coffee was poured. Conversations restarted, but nothing felt the same. Every person inside knew they had just witnessed a moment that would stay with them long after they left. Outside, the police officer guided the bully toward the patrol car. His head was down now. No shouting. No arguments. Just the quiet realization that the world had finally seen him clearly. Inside, Steven sat across from his mother, watching her hand steady as she lifted her tea. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I am now." After moments of trauma, the body doesn't crave justice first. It craves safety. And safety begins with being believed. A young woman approached their table hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said, voice shaking. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry no one stopped him sooner." The widow smiled kindly. "You stayed," she said. "That matters." Another man followed. I should have spoken up faster, he admitted. Steven shook his head. You spoke up eventually. That's how change starts. One by one, people came forward, not for photos, not for praise, but to acknowledge what they'd witnessed. Unbeknownst to them, the videos were already spreading. Clips of the slap. Steven standing calmly. The widow's quiet strength. The apology, real this time. By the time the police car drove away, the story had escaped the diner walls. In today's world, justice no longer depends only on courts. It also depends on witnesses willing to press record. Quick question. Do you think cameras make people safer? Or do they only change behavior when someone famous is involved? Share your opinion below. Outside, a small crowd had formed. Not fans, just curious locals drawn by flashing lights and raised voices. Someone whispered, "That's Steven Seagal." Steven gently guided his mother past them. "Please," he said. "Give her space." They reached his car. He opened the door for her carefully, the same way she had once done for him countless times. Before she got in, she paused. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did," Steven replied. "You taught me how." As they drove away, notifications exploded across social media. Elderly woman assaulted in diner, son steps in calmly. Steven Seagal confronts bully without violence. A lesson in dignity and restraint. But what resonated most wasn't his name. It was her face. The quiet courage of a woman who refused to disappear. Heroism doesn't always look powerful. Sometimes it looks patient. Sometimes it looks tired, but still standing. Later that evening, Steven's phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from friends. From strangers. From people sharing their own stories. One message stood out. "That could have been my mother." Steven closed his eyes. "Let me ask you watching. When you saw this story, who did it remind you of? A parent? A grandparent? Yourself? Tell us in the comments." The next morning, news outlets picked it up. The diner released a statement. The police department confirmed charges. But the most powerful response came from the widow herself. She didn't want interviews. She didn't want attention. She wanted one message shared. Steven read it aloud on a short video he posted himself. "I am not special. I am not brave. I am simply a woman who refused to accept being treated as less than human. Thank you to everyone who stayed. And to those who stayed silent, I hope next time you won't." The video went viral. Millions watched. Millions reflected. Human explanation, collective pause. Sometimes one quiet voice gives permission to millions of others to finally speak. The bully's name surfaced briefly, then faded. Not because he didn't matter, but because the story had moved beyond him. This wasn't about punishment. It was about awareness. At a local community center days later, a discussion was held. Elderly rights. Public accountability. Bystander responsibility. Steven didn't speak much. His mother did. "I don't want people to be afraid," she said to the room. "I want them to be kind." Applause followed, not loud, but sincere. Question for you. Do you think moments like this actually change society? Or do they fade too quickly? Be honest. Share your thoughts. That night, Steven walked his mother to her door. She turned to him before going inside. "Promise me something. Anything. Don't let them turn this into a story about fame." He nodded. "I won't." She smiled. "Good. Because it was never about that." She closed the door gently. Steven stood there for a moment, staring at the quiet street. He knew something now. Real strength isn't about winning. It's about standing still long enough for truth to catch up. And somewhere out there, in diners, buses, sidewalks, and waiting rooms, people were watching more closely than before. Because of one elderly widow. And one moment that refused to be ignored. The world eventually moved on. Trending topics changed. New videos replaced old ones. Another outrage waited its turn. But for the people who witnessed that moment in the diner, and for millions who watched it later, Something stayed. The widow woke up the next morning the same way she always had. Early. Quiet. Careful. She brewed tea, opened the curtains, and let the sunlight fill the room. But something inside her felt different. Not louder. Not harder. Stronger. Steven visited later that day. He found her folding laundry, humming softly. "You should be resting," he said. She smiled. "I am." They sat together at the small kitchen table, the same one where she had once helped him with homework, where she had stretched meals when money was tight, where she had learned to be strong alone. "I didn't like the attention," she admitted. "But I liked what it did." Steven nodded. It reminded people to look. Dignity doesn't demand applause. It simply asks to be remembered. Messages kept coming in, not asking for autographs, not praising Steven, but thanking her. Elderly women. Widowers. Caregivers. People who had been silent for years. One message read, "I thought being quiet was the only way to survive. Now I see it's not." The widow closed her eyes when she read that. "That's enough," she whispered. Later that week, Steven returned to the diner alone. The same booth. The same counter. But a different atmosphere. The waitress recognized him immediately. "Your mom okay?" "She is," he said. "Thank you for asking." The manager came out from the back. "We've started a policy," he said. "Zero tolerance. If someone disrespects anyone here, especially the elderly, they're out." Steven nodded. That matters. Change rarely comes from speeches. It comes from moments, and what people choose to do after them. At a nearby table, a young man helped an older woman into her seat. No cameras. No drama. Just awareness. Steven paid his bill and stood to leave. Before he did, he turned back to the room. "Look out for each other," he said simply. That was it. No quote for headlines. No performance. Outside, life continued, messy, imperfect, unfinished. But somewhere, a line had been drawn. Let me ask you something important. After watching this story, do you think you'd notice injustice faster next time? Or would fear still hold you back? Be honest in the comments. That evening, Steven's mother watched the sunset from her window. She thought about her husband. About years spent being strong quietly. About how easily people look past those who move slowly. She smiled. Not because she had won, but because she had been seen. A society isn't judged by how it treats the powerful, but by how it treats those who can't fight back. The video eventually faded from feeds. But the message didn't. Somewhere, a bully thought twice. Somewhere, a bystander spoke up sooner. Somewhere, an elderly person walked into a public place feeling just a little safer. And that was enough. Steven kissed his mother's forehead before leaving that night. "You did good," he said. She shook her head. "No," she replied gently. "I lived honestly. That's all." He smiled, because he knew that was the greatest lesson she had ever taught him. If you believe elderly people deserve respect and protection, type honor in the comments. If you believe silence enables abuse, tap like. And subscribe for more powerful human stories that remind us who we should be. Because dignity, once seen, can never be unseen.